let's try to think critically and put ourselves in the minds of these radical political activists who are perpetrating violence on communities, not only now over ICE immigration enforcement, but on a variety of things, whatever the flavor of the day is, whether it's, their love for Hamas or their hate for police officers, whatever it is. So what would you do? Let's be honest with ourselves. If you thought you were fighting fascists, like if you really believed that you were fighting the equivalent of Hitler and the Nazis, what would you be willing to do? What do you think you would do in response to a threat to humanity that was that grave? I'd like to think that I would have killed some Nazis, frankly. I mean, if you could, literally, if you had this group of people in the SS and the Nazis and Hitler, and they were perpetrating genocide and they were murdering people in mass, millions of people, trying to cleanse the world, what would you have done? I like to think if given the opportunity, I would have been capable of killing them. Like at the very least, and taking to the streets and clashing with the SS or whatever it is. I mean, if you really were there in that moment, faced with such a grave threat to humanity. So when you start to think of it that way, and then you start to think of the fact that you have these left-wing rioters and Antifa, etc., who genuinely believe that. They believe they are right now in Los Angeles. They believe they're fighting a threat just as grave as Hitler and the Nazis. And yes, it's because they're misguided morons, right? But it's also because we have some of the highest elected officials in the land who are telling them to believe that, who are convincing them that their thought process, that they're basically fighting Nazis, is correct. In Washington State, our highest member of law, I call it law enforcement, but the chief law enforcer in the state of Washington is telling them that Donald Trump, that his federal immigration enforcement amounts to fascism. Here's Washington Attorney General Nick Brown in an interview with KUOW.
The Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, has threatened to mobilize active duty Marines in response to the protests in Los Angeles. And this would seem to be in, violation of laws against U.S. military engaging in law enforcement on U.S. soil, the Posse Comitatus Act. Do you take that as a serious possibility from the federal government at this point from what you've seen?
Well, we certainly have to take anything that the Secretary of Defense says seriously on the one hand, because these are the people that are in control of our various government entities. But to hear that from the Secretary of Defense is pretty scary because, as you note, you can't simply do that because you want to. And I think more broadly, what we're seeing from the president is, it really does meet the definition of fascism. And I don't say such a thing lightly. I think we have to be very careful about our language, but we're seeing authoritarianism, we're seeing dictatorial behavior, we're seeing that to suppress what the president believes is the opposition, and we're seeing a disregard for the rule of law, all of which are characteristics of a fascist government. And, when the Secretary of Defense is talking about activating the U.S. military to quell some disturbance in a city involving American citizens, we have to treat that very seriously, even though it's unprecedented and I think would be illegal.
Yeah, we have to use our words carefully. But Trump is a dictator. Trump is an authoritarian. Trump is a fascist. So what the state's chief law enforcer is doing is he's justifying this violent faction of the left in their actions against fascists. Now, I think it's split. I think there are some of these left-wing nut jobs who actually do believe. Like, I've been around enough TDS and all of that. They actually do believe Trump is a fascist. And they actually do believe that there is a comparison to be made between Donald Trump and Hitler. So I do believe that faction is absolutely 100% there. But and then I think some of them are just using, they'll protest anything. So I don't know that they really believe in their heart and soul that Donald Trump poses a threat as great as Hitler did. But for the people who want to feel justified in what they're doing, now they have our Attorney General who's helping them feel justified in it. He's inviting violence into our communities as the guy who he's supposed to be, more so than anyone else, protecting our communities against criminal wrongdoing. So when you start to think of it, I mean, it's not just, and I think I need to start changing the way that I talk about these people. It's not just some fringe faction of the left. It's the Democratic establishment that is encouraging this behavior, that is condoning this behavior, that's excusing this behavior, because they use words like fascist to describe Donald Trump. And so when we have violence over this on the streets of Seattle, Nick Brown is directly to blame for it. Because he told them, you're fighting fascists, basically. Do what you need to do. Because this is an existential threat to our country. This is a dictator. This is authoritarianism. And, I mean, right as this is happening, Antifa sends out this alert. Emergency protest from LA to Seattle. ICE out. It's happening tomorrow, 7 p.m. Guess where? Cal Anderson Park. 10th and Denny. The heart of where we were 5 years ago with political violence and unrest in this city. They say the people of Los Angeles and surrounding areas have taken a courageous stand against Trump's reign of terror targeting immigrant families. In response, the administration has falsely labeled those taking to the streets in protest of the brutal war on immigrants as rioters and called in thousands of National Guard soldiers for a crackdown. But we cannot let this repression intimidate us. For those who believe in immigrant rights, for those who believe in democracy, for the entire working class, now is the time to take to the streets in protest. And this particular group, when they say protest, they mean riot. There's a reason that they're having it at night, at 7 p.m., in the heart of the most riot-prone area of the city of Seattle. And it comes as the state's chief law enforcer is basically telling them, go ahead and do it. These are fascists. I just don't know what to do to wake people up and change their way of thinking this Saturday. There's another opportunity for violence to devolve. And instead of at every opportunity, anyone who's an actual leader should, without qualification, be saying that this has to stay peaceful. This has to stay peaceful. Instead, they're just adding fuel to the fire because they're making it about Donald Trump and they're blaming Donald Trump for it because he started all this by enforcing immigration laws. Immigration laws, which, by the way, are wildly popular with the American people. And that was the chief reason he was reelected. And this Saturday, all across the country, Seattle Indivisible is holding one of those No Kings. So there's this stupid No Kings mass protest all across the country. There's like 1,900 locations that are having rallies and marches. And I'm sure a lot of those will be mundane. I mean, I even heard some like Eastern Washington, tiny little towns where people are going to show up for a No Kings protest. Those are probably going to be your geriatric progressives who are going to show up with one or two of their friends after having morning tea, and they're going to be just fine and protest as is the American way, and then they're going to go home. But of course, when there's any sort of protest happening in Seattle, as this one is going to happen again, Cal Anderson Park, they're going to start at Cal Anderson Park and march to Seattle Center, to the Space Needle. Yeah, that'll go well. Again, emboldened, given permission to engage by any means necessary to topple a fascist regime by the state's chief law enforcer and by the state's governor, who has never called out. Never. Has he ever? The one time I can think of was when they blocked the freeway. And it was this like tepid, And he was running for governor, so Bob Ferguson felt like he had to. Left-wing violence on campus for the pro-Hamas folks, summer of 2020. He didn't say anything about the violence, looting, vandalism. And so what's going to happen? I mean, they know that they can do this. They're being told that it's okay. And they're being told that they're doing something historic by fighting against a fascist that's as bad as Adolf Hitler. So it's like, do I blame the left-wing lunatics who scurry out of their parents' basements and put on all black and go out and break things? Yes, it's their fault. They need to be held accountable. I hope the feds institute federal charges against them because we know the states and the counties and the cities won't do a damn thing. But I blame the so-called leaders and ultimately the voters and the media. It's all this sick cycle where the media doesn't hold them accountable for saying it. So then the voters, they just blame whoever the media wants to blame, which is Orange Man bad. And then they'll vote for the Democrats because they think the Democrats are the ones protecting the democracy. So it's just a sick, sick, sick cycle. And I don't know when people will get tired of it. Meanwhile, the only ones who seem to be actually sending a message that violence is not okay, that we're not going to tolerate violence, and we're actually going to act on arrests and prosecution, seems to be President Donald Trump and his administration.
Many of those people that you saw on television last night are criminals that were allowed into our country by Biden. And they want to stay, and we don't want them. And they come from jails, and they come from mental institutions, and they come from all over the world, not just South America. And we're not going to let them stay. And this is the first, perhaps, of many, or perhaps, if we didn't attack this one very strongly, you'd have them all over the country. But I can inform the rest of the country that when they do it, if they do it, they're going to be met with equal or greater force than we met right here.
Yeah. So you've got Donald Trump, who is saying, look, if you riot in anywhere in the country, city like Seattle, you riot there, you're going to be met with force. If you assault our ICE agents, you try to vandalize a federal building, you'll be met with force. So that's what Donald Trump is saying in advance of these protests that are going to happen in the next few days. Meanwhile, Democrat Attorney General Nick Brown is saying, well, they're fascists, so what are you going to do? Making them think that they're on a righteous mission. And meanwhile, the Trump administration isn't going to give in and stop enforcing immigration laws, because then they know you give in to the mob, you give a mouse a cookie. And that's not just they're not just all going to suddenly go home and, we don't have anything to protest and riot about anymore. No, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. They'll always find something. This week, it happens to be over immigration. And so the Trump administration is not going to give a mouse a cookie and reward bad behavior. They're going to continue, and ICE agents at great personal risk to themselves are going to continue going across the country into sanctuary jurisdictions like the city of Seattle, and they're going to enforce our nation's immigration laws. In fact, Tom Homan, gosh, he's a beast. He was on the news saying, if anything, we're going to double down.
We could arrest them in the safety and security of a county jail, but they won't let us into jail. They release them into the community, which means we got to send a whole bunch of teams in the community to find this dangerous person that don't want to be found. So sanctuary cities are going to get exactly what they don't want. More officers in the communities and more officers in worksite. We can't arrest them in jail or arrest them in the community. If we can't arrest them in the community, we're going to increase worksite enforcement operation. We're going to flood the zone. And based on what LA is doing right now, we're going to continue to flood the zones. We're going to be there tonight. We're going to be there tomorrow. We're going to be there every day in the next 4 years, arresting public safety threat illegal aliens. We're not going to apologize for doing it.
Yeah, they're not going to back down. They're not going to give in to the mob, as the left has done for so long, ignored the mob, gave in to the mob, gave over 6 square blocks of a city to the mob, just hoping, okay, we'll hand out $1 million contracts to people based on their skin pigmentation in the hopes that they'll stop rioting and looting in our cities. Of course, they never did. They just took the money and ran. We'll side with them. We'll bribe them. We'll condone. And maybe one day they'll stop burning down our cities. Well, that's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. We've been waiting for that to happen for like 25 years. So the Trump administration is going to keep doing what it's doing, even though Democrats are saying, you doing this is leading to this, which is not Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom is worse than Bob Ferguson. He's worse than Bob Ferguson. More shameless. I mean, it just makes your skin crawl, some of these interviews he's been doing and fundraising off the riots. I was pulling up some of his X posts, and he's calling it Trump's chaos now. Do you have this montage? Trump's chaos. Have no doubt violent criminals who take advantage of Trump's chaos will be held accountable. We didn't have a problem until Trump got involved. Really? That tells me that you don't think that people assaulting ICE agents is a problem, because that was happening before Trump said he was going to call in National Guard. State and local leaders are standing together to clean Trump's mess up. To the bad actors fueling Trump's flames, California will hold you accountable. foolish agitators who take advantage of Trump's chaos. This is my favorite one. Chaos is exactly what Trump wanted, and now California is left to clean up the mess. Your own mess. Your own mess. Unreal. And just watching him, he has plenty of time. He's calling in all his favorite left-wing podcasters to come in and sit down with him in the war room, the riot war room, to do interviews. Oh my gosh, made my skin crawl. This, if Donald Trump wants a scalp, just arrest me. Just arrest me. Leave these people alone, trying to act like some sacrificial lamb. So see-through, so insane. The only Democrat who appears to have a head on their shoulders continues to be Senator John Fetterman. The only one who's been unequivocal that what's happening in California is the fault of those actually perpetrating the violence and not Donald Trump. So I've got to give him credit. He sent out a post. I unapologetically stand for free speech, peaceful demonstrations, and immigration, but this is not that. This is anarchy and true chaos. My party loses the moral high ground when we refuse to condemn setting cars on fire, destroying buildings, and assaulting law enforcement. And it's not even that his party refuses to condemn it. His party refuses to acknowledge it's even happening. They want you not to believe the pictures, not to believe the videos, not to believe what you're seeing with your own eyes. The approved Democratic talking points since Saturday have gone something like this. Oh, it's peaceful. What are you talking about? It's peaceful. Okay, it's mostly peaceful. All right, it's violent, but it's Donald Trump's fault. And then for the very unhinged, yeah, but January 6th, that's my favorite. Yeah, it's violent, but what about January 6th? That was much worse. And it's almost in unison. Those have been the talking points for Democrats pushed out to Democratic members of Congress, most of whom gladly take it up and tweet it out. And look, again, I'm willing to have we can have it right now, conversation about Trump's use of the military and calling in the National Guard. First of all, as someone, I don't remember who it was now, so aptly pointed out on social media, Gavin Newsom called in the National Guard and police during COVID. He sent police to the beaches to enforce the mask mandate. So you're willing to sick police officers on people who are on the beach who aren't wearing a mask. But when Donald Trump wants to call in the National Guard to protect life and property, you all of a sudden have a problem with that. So give me a break on the National Guard thing. And National Guard and the Marines, they're not out on the streets acting as police officers. They're specifically fulfilling a mission of protecting federal property and federal immigration agents. Now, these are two different things, the National Guard versus the troops. I think there's a reason why our founding fathers put so much safeguards in place to make sure that active duty military was not used on American soil in any way against American citizens. Now, I also think there's some gray area. I think a lot of people in those crowds are not American citizens. I believe they're foreign nationals who are fomenting violence on our streets. How do you tell the difference in the moment, though? I'm not sure. So I have mixed feelings about the Marines. But I was responding to Anna Kasparian with the Young Turks, who we've had on the show, who I just think is great, who's been a little red-pilled on what's happening in California, specifically over the last 5 years. And she was saying, she doesn't really support and does believe that Trump has instigated things happening there. And the question I asked her is, at what point would it have been acceptable to California and to Gavin Newsom and to Democrats for Donald Trump to call in help? I mean, at no point did LAPD or local police have things under control. You had a free-for-all of people throwing rocks at and assaulting immigration agents before Trump said anything about the National Guard. And LAPD was nowhere in sight. So does Donald Trump just sit back until things are horrible and people are dying? There was no response from the Trump administration that was going to please Gavin Newsom. Let's just be clear about that. There was no response from the Trump administration that would please Democrats. None. Either it would have been, he's calling him in too soon, or he's calling him in too late. He did too much, he did too little. There's no response that would have pleased them. So let's stop pretending like there is and stop giving California a free pass and California leaders a free pass for being okay with a certain level of political violence. And then they don't want to take any responsibility for it. So now it's Trump's chaos. Okay, what was it when they were rioting and protesting in favor of Hamas? Whose fault was it when they were rioting in favor of, hating the police or against the police? Who was it during the Occupy movement? I mean, this time you can blame Donald Trump if you want, but next time when it happens again in a couple weeks or a few months and it has nothing at all to do with President Trump, who are you going to blame then? This is just what you've allowed for. The looting. Absolutely insane. Yes, nothing says we hate ICE like looting an Apple store. And again, that's not new either. That happens every single time there's any sort of riot or chaos in these West Coast cities and in these Democrat-run states. Absolutely unreal.